Hello, rays of sunshine, and welcome back to another video. I'm so excited to record this. Let's see how long we get to record. As you guys know, you don't know, but I am, a new mother. So I'm kind of like not really having a lot of time to record. And as you know, content creation is not really a priority for me. It is one of those things that I enjoy. I shared that in the podcast, just kind of letting some of my new followers know what we're about over here. This is not really the space to debate and be argumentative. I mean, of course, share your thoughts. You always have the opportunity to, have a right to your freedom of speech. But at the end of the day, I do this because I enjoy it. I do it for free. I've been doing it for a few years now, and I just am so grateful for the community that we're building. So welcome. My name is Jalen. I am a wannabe PhD student. I read books, I share my thoughts, and I just create videos. I love talking. I'm a conversationalist, and I was here before the titles. I was here before self-proclamation. A lot of these things that interest me were here long before video essays. Well, let me not say the video essays, but I'll just say the prominence of a lot of these thought leaders and things like that. So yeah, welcome. So I was watching Lion King because it's one of my daughter's favorite movies. But I was just watching The Lion King, and I've watched it a few times now. And first of all, I think it's a great movie for kids because it's just a great film about morality, right? But I was watching The Lion King, and I was just thinking about like power. And obviously you've seen The Lion King, but if you've not seen The Lion King, it's about two brothers and essentially the story of betrayal, power, triumph. Yeah, in Africa. So anyway, but you've seen The Lion King. But anyway, I was watching The Lion King, and I was just kind of looking at Scar and this dynamic of like power. And then I was, kind of translating that to Trump and just kind of like what it is with people who desire power. And something that's very interesting within these specific individuals, and I think something that we can kind of streamline, especially when you study the behavior of people who really do desire power, is one, they'll make a lot of people false promises, right? So they'll promise you if you help them to acquire this sense of power, they will give you this, they will give you that, right? And you can kind of see this too with predatory behaviors, right? Not even just predatory lending, but quite literally pedophilia, right? You'll see like this kind of like dynamic of over promising, right? False promises. I think the other thing too you'll see with people who desire power is that they go in front of communities of people who are very vulnerable. So obviously in The Lion King, the hyenas were very vulnerable in contrast to the lions, right? And so they go in communities that are very vulnerable. And the other dynamic is, it's very interesting. They don't really covet the nobility of the person who is in position of power, right? So if you take, for example, the character of Obama, right? And I think that this is so amazing. I mean, one thing that I have been doing lately is really just sitting in a space of awe, for Black people and for Blackness, because it really is amazing. Like, as Toni Morrison said, it's amazing that Black people are even still alive, right? I just found out in my city, well, actually not in my city, but in the state over next to me, this park that I was so connected to. I've always visited this park. I thought it was just so beautiful. I would go and sit in this park when I was just really going through some really tough times in my earlier 20s. And I just always felt connected to the park. I mean, it was obviously a beautiful park, but that was kind of when I was exploring a little bit of history about Native Americans. I went to the Grand Canyons. I bought a book about Native Americans, the wisdom of Native Americans, and I came back to my city, and I just felt so connected to the land. I was a bit on a spiritual tip, but nonetheless, let me not veer too far into that. But so this park, come to find out, my local newspaper puts out a article talking about how this park was formerly owned by a general who owned a plantation, and he left his estate and millions of dollars to those that were enslaved. However, they were enslaved, so they weren't able to acquire the money or the land. And now they were kind of looking into reparations, but of course the courts are continuously denying it. And I remember I would go over here to this park, and I was so amazed at these homes. I mean, just incredibly beautiful architecture. And something that will forever grieve my spirit is the fact that it really is because of slavery. You know, you will drive in these neighborhoods, right? You'll drive in predominantly white neighborhoods, right? Predominantly affluent neighborhoods, and you will be astonished. You will feel like you are not enough. You will feel like, what is it about these people? Are they doctors? Are they lawyers? You know, but the reality is that they really have acquired this wealth through slavery. And it's really saddening to me, because I just think that we don't talk about it enough to our youth. And I don't think we articulate it in a way that they can really understand, because, well, first of all, in American society, this country has done a phenomenal and clearly continuous job at dismantling the truth, right? Like it's pretty much, so when we have these conversations and we say, yeah, it's because of slavery, right? That's why there's such a huge disproportionate wealth gap. It's like a taboo. You can't even possibly wrap your mind around it, right? And so it is incredibly amazing as Black people that we are still standing and that we are still here. I know we've had conversations about working around, you know, figuring out what Black excellence, or, you know, what it is to live a good life, what it is to aspire and to have things like that. I know I published a podcast episode talking about hope for the youth and just really encouraging education. This is another thing I would say too, something that you can kind of streamline with people of power. They will hold a particular position and they'll tell you not to try for the position, right? Like, you wouldn't be able to handle it. It's just too much, right? And you can kind of see this with some people who maybe have acquired college degrees, and they'll sit in front of the youth, in front of people, and they'll say, you don't want to do this. You know, whole time they're making, you know, a sustainable amount of living compared to the person who does not have a degree and has not obtained that education. So it's just very interesting. And I think what's really underneath all of that, right? Because how can you possibly say, don't do what I did, when you've done it and you can clearly see that you are benefiting from the choices that you made? I think it's because, you know, and we start talking about rich people specifically, you know, billionaires and things like that. Let me not say billionaires, because that's a different bracket, right? Education is not typically in that bracket, obviously, because if it were, you would have to consider things like the ecosystem and sustainability, and you would have to have some type of charitable characteristic about yourself, right? Like that. I think that just requires a little bit more pruning, so to speak, in regards to character development and just all those things. And obviously, let's not go too far left, you know, because I just think that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. But yeah, so I think really what it is you have people who are essentially talking you out of this space, and specifically Black people, when we start talking about education and discouraging our youth for to acquire education and to go on and obtain more education. I think that this is really just due to white Americans not wanting to see African Americans progress, but also not really wanting to have to deal, I don't want to say competition, but for lack of better words, right? When you are told that you have to be twice as good, you're going to be better than everybody else. Okay, it's just what it is, right? Because nobody is here working as hard as you, right? Because you don't even think that you deserve to be here, so you're going to give way more than the average person. It just is what it is, right? And that's just something that we can see across the board. When you put African Americans in the spotlight, right, and you stop, you know, continuously sharing the stories of, you know, some of the more prominent African American figures like Rosa Parks and Emmett Till. Like, when you start really looking at the whole collective, right, of African American studies, and you start looking at the progress that we've made and just really start unraveling it, of course, it's going to be an independent study, but African Americans have succeeded everyone in American society. You know, we're pretty much the first in a lot of different areas. We are, you know, we start talking about excellence. I mean, quite literally, we've superseded a lot of white Americans, immigrants, and so many other people in this country. Okay, and you know, I even think about Paul Williams. I think it's his name, Paul Williams. You know, the architecture, first Black architecture, he learned to draw upside down because white Americans didn't want to look at him when he was, you know, so he learned to draw upside down, right? Architecture, upside down. He learned to draw. And so, you know, he's got these beautiful Mediterranean homes, and you don't even know anything about it in California, right? You don't even hear the conversations, right? He's literally had homes for Denzel Washington, some of the most, you know, famous celebrities, and you can kind of see his model, right? His initial prototype in every California home today, right? But he's not, you don't have a conversation, you don't hear his name, right? And I think this is why I have to kind of say, I have to critique modern museums and contemporary museums, because where's the history, right? I mean, in my city, the exhibition is all every year. It's Rosa Parks, it's Emmett Till, you know, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, like there are so many more layers here. And I think that this is the other reason too, when I talk about education, this is so important because when you talk about representation, if you knew that your kinfolk, right, went before you, it has already paved the way, right, paved the way and has superseded the standard, right? You can actually sit in that space and say, you know what, I can do this, right? But you don't hear about black doctors, right? What's the black doctor in Hopkins? What is his name? Vivian, right? You don't hear about Vivian and how he saved babies. I think it was cardiovascular surgery, right? So I just think this is why it's so important. We start talking about representation, but most importantly, this is why it's important to talk about education, because when we bring in the full picture, especially with regards to our youth, you no longer feel so intimidated because you understand you are not the first, right? You are not the first gen X, Y, and Z. You are not the first, you know what I mean? Like, no, there's been people here before you and they've done it in way worse conditions, right? And you feel a little bit more encouraged and you feel more empowered. And you know, you recognize that we're not really looking for representation, right? Because the door has already been open. You just got to go through it, right? What did Maya Angelou say? Okay, walk in there like you're standing as 10,000 because you are, you know? And so back to what I was saying about the architecture, I mean, it really blows my mind when I sit and think like the reality is that slaves built this. Black people built this, okay? Like, it's insane. So I highly encourage you guys to study the history in your city. Study the history in your city, study the history in your state, because yeah, it's there, you know, and if we leave it to the general public, if we leave it to a lot of institutions, they're not going to educate us about the local things that have taken place, you know, and a lot of people don't want to have these conversations. I personally don't think there's really anything that is more important than educating people about African American history. You know, I understand everyone doesn't want to be an activist. I too take breaks from the work, and I've just been reading fiction here lately, just to kind of like decompress. But at the end of the day, I mean, when you overcome the rage, you know, it's incredibly empowering. I mean, seriously, you talk about validation, you know, absolutely, I don't need it. From white people, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know, and, you know, there was a conversation going on TikTok talking about how younger generations don't know how to code switch. And I can honestly say I've got to a place in my life where I know how to navigate corporate. I just kind of want to leave you guys with a little nugget here. First of all, don't seek validation, right? Because I think that's the biggest thing, right? You kind of have that bullying of like Carlton, right? You kind of have that bullying of Black Americans who find themselves integrated in white spaces, but understand that you don't need their validation, okay? And when we start talking about code switch, it's not code switch, it's professionalism, right? And that's just the American standard, period. And you are very much American as the next person, right? It blows my mind how, you know, we've yet to take up our identity as Americans, right? As Black Americans, right? While everyone else is fighting for that identity, right? Every other immigrant is fighting for the identity of an American. And it's the one thing that we still haven't really resonated with. And rightfully so, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, that's important. That's important. So just understand that you don't need their validation. You know, it took a while to get here, you know, but when you really start standing in your power, right? Not sure your beliefs, but when you stand in who you are and who God has called you to be, what are we really talking about? You know you deserve to be here because you're not getting in on no DEI. I'm sorry. I've never got a job because I was Black. Never. You know, I've had a relative tell me that, you know, she's convinced herself, right? Because this is the thing about narratives and ideologies today. It's so hard to shut out the noise. And I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. But it's so hard to shut out the noise. And when you hear something so often, especially from those in position of power, that's my whole point, right? You're going to start to believe it. I looked at her and said, sweetie, you've never had a job because you were Black. Trust. You got the job because you were competent. Okay? You don't get hired because you're Black in America. Okay? That's not how it works here. Okay? I don't know what they're doing in other countries, but that's not how it works here. Okay? And with DEI initiatives, something that I will address, and I'll go ahead and end here because I don't know how long I'll be able to go. something I want to address with DEI initiatives is it saddens me how continuously, perpetually in this country, first of all, I'm looking at the younger generations. They're very integrated with white Americans, right? That was not a thing for me growing up. It's not that we were racist, but white Americans were blatantly racist. And it's something that still persists to this day, right? I still experience racism to this day from younger kids, from older, men and women. So it's still very much there. Especially in the eyes of white Americans who get angry. And, I long for the day when white people will really be able to sit and have a critical and constructive debate, or, be able to express their grievances in regards to African Americans in a very constructive and intellectual way. If you ever notice with white Americans, whenever they get angry, it's automatically in this, right? I mean, just all of this very defamatory language. It's very interesting, right? Or they're running to the law, right, to get you incarcerated, to, make you lose your job, your means of income, right? We've seen that time and time again, historically and even present day, right? Vlad TV. And I just think it's very interesting with white Americans, right? But very seldom are they ever really willing, very seldom do they have the intellectual capacity to really sit with us and to be like, well, hey, you guys talk a lot about this, but this is really what it is. And this is what, very seldom is it ever a constructive conversation. It automatically goes right into racism. And this is why I say that, we look at this country and we wonder, why are we not progressing, right? Why are we so regressive, right? It's not Kamala Harris, right? It's not any of the reasons that those who have been in longstanding positions of power have told you. We're regressive as Americans, as one of the most resourceful countries. Actually, Africa is the most resourceful, but we steal a lot of stuff, so we'll go ahead and say that. We wonder why we are not progressing, right? The land of convenience, right? Anything you want, you can literally get it here delivered in like 15 minutes, right? We're not progressing because white Americans have been at the forefront of this country, right? If you haven't realized it or recognized it, white Americans are very anti-intellectual, right? They don't take the time to really study anybody's culture but their own, right? They're overly consumed with the preservation of white supremacy, and white supremacy is pretty much just white dominance, right? And so we never really get anywhere. And with the DEI initiatives, I was so disappointed, especially in regards to a lot of these universities, because it wasn't about Black people. It's never about Black people, right? You literally have Project 2025 that is here, right? And the whole premise of this agenda is to dismantle the progress and the progression of African Americans in this country. And no one ever talks about it, right? But white Americans will rally together for Palestine. They will find a way to get overseas in another third world country to advocate for the poverty, advocate for equality, advocate for justice, but ignore the very injustices that have been persistent in this country for years, right? But this is the problem, right? Because you always have this integration. And so what it is it's nothing more than, it's not integration, right? It's colonization. Right? It's colonization mask, it's integration, okay? And it's nothing more than just, consistent cultural appropriation, right? You know how disappointing I was to see my local university, and they weren't advocating for African Americans, right? They weren't advocating for Black people to be on this campus and to have opportunities for better education. No, they were advocating for gay people. I've never understood this, right? I have friends who are gay, okay? When this all thing popped off, right, I said, what is the big deal with sexual orientation, right? And this is where I'll humbly submit to you guys. I don't know too much about it. I've never really looked into it. Because in my mind, it is pretty much just who you are attracted to, right? Who you like to have sex with. Does that alter how you present yourself? Yes. But why do we need to rally together for rights for a particular person who has chosen to live their life in a particular way, right? That's not really conservative. That's a genuine concern of mine, right? Now, when you start talking about Black people, well, Black trans, Black queer, that's a little different because, first of all, Black people are already being discriminated against. So that's no different than when you're Black and then you're a woman, when you're Black and then you're a man, and then, when you're Black and then, so you already, just being Black, you already have dings in your belt, right? So when you start adding different things, okay, that's one thing. But to make so many of our movements to really center so much of our work in regards to advocacy and justice for human rights on the basis of sexuality, which is nothing more than freedom of choice, is insane to me. Do you know in other countries you can't be gay? In other countries, you can't be gay. You know what I mean? I would think that they would more so have that plight versus Americans. And this is what I mean when I say the continuous hijacking of the Black American, right, of our plight, the continuous hijacking of all the work that we've done to get to where we are today, right? It's never really centering on, multiculturalism, integration, progression as Americans. No, it's always centering on Black people are gaining momentum. Let's hijack this. Let's deter the focus, right? And let's premise this on something else, right? And let's make them think that we're all in this together, right? But it's incredibly exhaustive, because at the end of the day, when I look up, I'm being discriminated against by a gay man in Urban Outfitters. Okay, that literally happened to me yesterday. You know what I mean? And I said, well, I'll be darned. I'll be darned. Yeah, a gay trans man literally discriminated against me. Super, and it's just like a gay white trans man is what I'm saying. What are we talking about? The heartthrob. The heartthrob is racism. The heartthrob is the continuous anti-intellectual and regressive nature of white people. It does not matter if you slap pride on it. It does not matter if you find yourself doing TikToks or find yourself integrated with Black people. No, this is the heartthrob. And whenever there's a disagreement that arises, it's back to the heartthrob. It's back to the heartthrob. And it's almost like white Americans don't even have to think about it. You would be like, oh my God, Kelly, I never knew you were this racist. And a situation occurs and they don't even have to think about it. It's almost like that default setting kicks in. And we realize that we've made no progress. And why have we made no progress? Because white Americans are more concerned with the sustaining of power, okay? And that's the premise. That is the premise, okay? They're sitting here, they're advocating for, what, I don't even know at this point. Most white Americans, I'm not gonna say all, but I'll say a vast majority of them, right? I'm reading this book. It's called, it's by Tracy McMillan, and it's called, I can't even think of the name of it. It's called The White Something. But she just talks about the disparities, obviously, the wealth gap between, with housing and things like that. I just started, so let's just take it easy. She's a journalist. But she talks about, just the disparities, the economic disparities between white and Black people, and how white people will always make significantly more than African Americans. So when I see, people advocating for Trump, they're not saying, hey, Trump is wrong advocating against Trump. They're not saying Trump is wrong because Trump is racist. No, they're saying Trump is wrong because they don't even know why they're saying Trump is right. They don't even know why they're even advocating against Trump, right? I think so much of white American effort to, I think so much of the effort that white Americans make in joining Black allegiance is always really kind of centering it back on themselves, and they're kind of just always lost in the middle of our movements, right? They never really understand that we're advocating against racism. We're advocating for equality, right? They never really quite understand that, and I think that's because they don't want to advocate for that, right? And I just think that that's the reality. That's the reality. So when they're advocating against Trump, I'm not really sure what the motive is. Perhaps it's common narrative. I said that on a short. I think a lot of times it's common narrative. It's a popular thing to do. It's what we're gonna do, and that's what it is. Very seldom is it ever, hey, no, we're against Trump because he's racist, right? Because when Obama was here in office, I'm not talking about the economy. I'm talking about specifically Obama's leadership, right? We were all a little bit more friendly. I think we can all agree that we were all a little bit more friendly, right? Right? We were all a little bit more respectful, a little bit more hopeful, right? That's a good leader. That's what leadership does, right? It inspires people, right? You then seen a lot more of the cultural normalization of, queer folks and things like that, right? People were feeling safe to come out and be, you know what I mean? Like, whatever. My point is that leadership made a difference. And what do we have today? Hate. And so my point is, I don't even think that white Americans know why they're advocating against Trump. I really don't. Like I said, I think common narrative. I think white Americans have always had a tendency to over-intellectualize many things. And they take the truth out of something, right? And I don't know if it was either Maya Angelou or, again, Toni Morrison. I think it was Maya Angelou. But she said, the truth is the truth. Sometimes the truth is not a statistic. Okay, let's talk about it. Sometimes the truth is not a statistic. Sometimes the truth is not anything that you can, It's not a statistic, simply put. The truth is the truth. The truth is what you see with your eyes, and that's the reality. Okay, even if it has never been documented, even if, you know what I mean, it's not what's blasted on CNN, that's the truth. That's the truth. So again, yeah, I'm still trying to wrap this video up by really trying to understand why white Americans are advocating against Trump. Again, it's always really a matter of how is this going to impact our income, right? Or why we're not making as much money as Trump. Because even when you kind of look at that, it's like, well, these men are white, like these are white men, these are white men in positions of power, it's not black people. It's not, so I think there's always kind of been that kinship with white Americans in regards to wealth anyway, right? So what's really at the crux of this, right? Because it's not anti-racism efforts. It's not, advocating for black people. And I keep saying black people because yes. And even still, I mean, I've not even seen really many white Americans even advocate for Hispanics, and the deportation, things like that. So I don't know. I know this is a bit long-winded, but stay in school. Stay in school. Life is incredibly difficult when you don't go to school. You can do so many different things, right? A lot of people on here are kind of young, so I just want to talk to you guys for a minute, and I'm going to close. But you can do so many different things. Architecture, design, you don't always have to stick to the basics. I actually seen this girl on TikTok, black art curator. And I just found this book. It's I think it's art and contemporary or something like that. And it just really it addresses how art in contemporary spaces has been discriminatory, of course, of black people. And you can even see that even in my local museums. There was one exhibition, I think, I don't even know if it was anything that was repetitious, but there was one exhibition on black art, and it was so beautiful. I mean, just a beautiful exhibition, and they got rid of it. It didn't last. But this is supposed to be an art museum that is, I don't know too much about art museums, so I don't know too much of the jargon, but like simply put, like this is an art museum that like stands the test of time, right? So I would think that with all this European art in here, at one point this big museum would have a place for African Americans, right? There's Africa, but there's no contemporary art. And even in contemporary art spaces and museums in the city, it is all white artists. And I have a hard time believing that black artists are not trying to get in the door, and they're not promoting their art, and they're not communicating with some of these curators. I have a very hard time believing that, right? So the work is never done. The work is never done. Don't go to sleep. I know everyone's like, oh, woke this, woke that. Don't go to sleep because the work is never done. And stay in school. Like I said, you could be so many different things. Please, I'm going to leave with this. Look up your local history for black history. Look up the black history in your city, okay? And start, if you're young, find the first black person in your industry, okay? Or find the black people in your industry because they've been there. We have always been here, right? We weren't just in chains and slaves and we never made any progress. No, we've made a lot of progress in this country, and it's continuous. But they're going to continue to tell you that we did it, and they're going to convince you that we are only relegated to poverty, and we are only relegated to, every other stereotype in the book, right? But it's not true. We've been progressing. We're continuously progressing. And I just want you guys to be encouraged, be encouraged, because absolutely not. So this is why I think it's important to have black teachers, okay? Say what they want. As a believer, let me not do that. Blasphemy. But as a believer and as someone who, is rooted in reality, I try my best to be grounded in truth. I don't always get it right, but I try my best to be grounded in truth. It either is or it isn't, right? The groundwork matters, okay? The groundwork matters, right? Social media is cool. It's cool. It's great. I've seen a lot of people, seemingly or supposedly, or at least the way they present it, have changed their lives with these platforms. But I'm here in the community, okay? Grassroots. Groundwork matters, okay? The foundation matters. For me, I've been online for a while. I've had my own journey, Okay. I don't, I think social media content creation is so much more than just being consistent. It is a skill. It's a skill. It's a marketable skill, but it's a skill first and foremost. And it requires a lot of resources. So I say that to say everyone's journey is not going to be that, right? But you can still have a good life. You can still be very successful by doing the hard work, which I know in today it is, modern society is going out of style. But hard work is real. It can actually get you somewhere in life. It will get you somewhere in life. And not only is it a matter of like, working hard, not just menial labor or for the sake of being laborious, but hard work produces character. Okay. It's wisdom in that. Okay. There's wisdom in that. And something that I love as I was reading Subverted by Sue Browden, or whatever. Let me not say whatever. I'm sorry. She's never going to see this video. But I did pronounce that wrong. But Subverted, I love what she talks about how, when she was coming up, I think it was maybe in the 70s or so. I don't know. I don't remember the year. But she just talked about how she started to notice that there was this new wave of like spirituality, and the language was very synonymous to that of biblical theology, but they weren't acknowledging the biblical theology. They were presenting it as if it was something new. So I say that to say everything kind of roots back to your values. So be rooted in that. God is cool. Stay in school.